This conference will now be recorded.
Right, now I'm going to
All
turn the
right.
program over to Scott Bjorklund, Park Ranger here in Duluth. Go ahead, Scott.
All right. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon to those in the Eastern time zone. It's still morning here in Central. Today, as Sarah said, we'll be doing a program on basically the history of Duluth-Superior Harbor, on both the harbor itself, and then Jayson Hron from the Port Authority will jump in halfway through and talk about the history of the Port Authority. So there'll be some overlap. This is a ginormous subject. We're one of the busiest harbors on the Great Lakes. So we've had a lot of history here since things first began for the harbor when the Sioux locks were built in 1855. So I'm going to do my best to kind of go through this in an abbreviated way as much as possible, talking about the different cargoes, how our port became the way it is today, with how busy it is and why it became such an important place on the Great Lakes for shipping. This first slide here, as an intro to the subject, this is what our harbor used to look like before any really serious development happened. The natural harbor before the Army Corps of Engineers or any other companies came in to dredge it to build docks originally was about 6 feet to 12 feet in depth. So it was pretty shallow. As you can see in this picture here, it was a very swampy kind of shallow harbor. This land feature, known as Park Point, that is kind of what helped form our harbor, with the waters of Lake Superior and the St. Louis River counteracting against each other and forming this long sandbar. That would create one of the best harbors on the Great Lakes for shipping. Before we get to the major commercial vessels that started coming into our harbor around the time of the building of the Sioux locks, the harbor itself originally was heavily used by the Ojibwe that lived here, that came here a couple hundred years ago from out east, and the native peoples before that for fishing, as well as trade. The Europeans that came to this area started to have permanent fur trading posts here in the 1780s. So pretty much right after the American Revolution, starting with the French and then eventually the British, establishing fur trading posts in the area as well as here in our harbor. And that was kind of the major trade here, fishing and fur trade, up until the 1850s. Famously, one of the larger fur trading posts that you can see in this painting was the one built at Fond du Lac up the river from us by the American Fur Trading Company in the 18 teens. And the American Fur Trading Company basically had a monopoly on the area at the time. And the fur trade itself was mostly focused on the beaver pelts, which were in heavy demand in Europe. And then once the fur trade kind of died out in the 1840s and 50s, the American Fur Trading Company actually switched to focus on fishing on Lake Superior and elsewhere. And that became their main form of business before we started having larger ships reach our area. So this is a very early map done by the Army Corps of Engineers when they first surveyed the harbor back in the 1860s. And this is what the natural formation looked like with all the different peninsulas and everything around there. So at the time, the Duluth Ship Canal didn't exist. That was a man-made entrance for our harbor. That wasn't built. We'll get to the story about that in a second. And then the only really natural way to get into the harbor besides portaging across the peninsula was entering through the Superior entry, where the St. Louis River naturally emptied into the lake. That is basically where the first harbor activity happened on the Superior, Wisconsin side, and which would eventually lead to Duluth becoming basically jealous and wanting their own business to happen on their side of the harbor, which led to the building of the canal. And just to kind of give a comparison, this is a Army Corps of Engineers map of our harbor in 1955. So this is after nearly 100 years of development. You can see how all these docks were made from fill and other material over time, and what the natural formations were underneath. But there's a lot of land out in the harbor that's been developed. A lot of dredge material used to fill in these spaces so that cargoes had space to be loaded and unloaded. So it's pretty amazing to kind of compare how the development happened over 100 years. And this map kind of represents what the current harbor still looks like. Even though this is from the 1950s, not a lot has changed in terms of the amount of land we have in our harbor. In 1955 was about the height of cargo being shipped through here. We're still the busiest port on the Great Lakes, but during the 50s we had most of our cargo. That was kind of the height of the amount of cargo we had coming through here. So to give kind of a comparison here of other harbors at the time that were some of the busiest in the Great Lakes in the 1850s, if you look on the left, that is the Chicago Harbor, and on the right, the Buffalo Harbor. So these two ports were the busiest before Duluth-Superior took over on tonnage, both of them being focused on grain traffic, immigrants, package freight, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of the harbors around the Great Lakes have been focused on rivers, where the rivers would naturally create areas for vessels to be able to dock and get safe shelter. And what really helped comparing our harbor to those already developed is that we have a lot more area behind Park Point that help the creation of docks and cargoes, gave a lot of area for ships to stay safe from storms. So Park Point was a significant land feature for our harbor. We also just had a lot of area in general behind Park Point to use for docks and cargoes. Today we have about 18 miles worth of channels back there, which is just to give an example of how much space we have in our harbor. So just to kind of give a comparison of harbors at the time. Another reason we came to such an important point for shipping is because of how far inland into North America we're located. You can see we're not that far away from the geographic center of the continent, so we were a natural location to use for shipping natural resources from everywhere possible to ship them east via the Great Lakes. We were a perfect spot for that. Plus, we also had the Iron Range that was nearby that really helped our tonnage numbers really go high because of the amount of iron ore that's being shipped through here. But we also have various other cargoes I'll talk about in a second. So location is a huge part of why we've become such an important port on the Great Lakes as well. In terms of commercial shipping, things didn't really take off for the port to start the development until the opening of the Soo Locks in 1855, which is when ships were finally allowed to easily get from the lower lakes up to Lake Superior for trade. Before then, before those lakes were built, it was very costly for ships to get into Lake Superior. As probably a lot of you know, before the Soo Locks were built, the ships were actually portaged but past the St. Mary's Rapids, which was about a 20-foot drop over a short amount of area. And this was a very expensive and very time-consuming process. Plus, when ships would actually try to ship cargoes down to the lower lakes, cargo would have to be unloaded off these ships and then again transported to below the rapids so they could be loaded onto other ships. But right as I mentioned, the Soo Locks took care of that problem immediately. And as a result, shipping activities started to develop for the Superior entry, the natural entry into our harbor.
Hey, Scott, sorry to interrupt. On a
Yeah.
previous map or chart, someone requested to have you point out Park Point.
previous. Yes, let me have a pointer here. So Park Point is this long peninsula that pretty much guards the harbor from uh, activity from waves from the lake. Um, and sorry, I should have been more clear as to what these land features are. So just a little bit of geography here. We have Park Point, the long sandbar, which is about total connected with Wisconsin. It's about 10 miles or so. The Duluth end of that is about 7. We also have this peninsula called Rice's Point that's part of Duluth. We also have Connors Point on the Wisconsin side. And then we have Grassy Point further in where the river starts to narrow further upstream. And we have St. Louis Bay here behind these two peninsulas. And then this is kind of the main gate basin, as it's called, just inside the peninsula. So I hope that helps on understanding the geography of our harbor. Again, here's what Park Point looks like these days. This is the very end of Park Point where we had our first lighthouse built because this was, again, the only entry into the harbor at the time. You can see the remains of that lighthouse here, known as the Minnesota Point Light, that was built in 1858. Just before that lighthouse was built, we had our first permanent resident that moved into the Duluth area. His name was George Stuntz. He was a surveyor with the U.S. government, and he was a major player in the development of early Duluth, as well as the superior part of the harbor as well with his surveying efforts. And he had established actually the first dock in the harbor when he built a dock just near where the lighthouse was built with the fur trading post that he had set up for business. And he basically lived and established himself on the end of Minnesota Point because that was where a lot of Native Americans, the Ojibwe in the area, were living at this part of the harbor. So for business, this is where he set himself up. Again, this is what the lighthouse looked like when it was first built in 1858. It was in use basically until about the 1880s. The reason why they stopped using the lighthouse is because over time the superior entry wasn't quite stabilized yet. So the sandbar would actually, sand would build up and slowly move the entry away from the lighthouse over time. So it became useless once it wasn't close to the entry anymore. So what really led to heavier development on the Duluth side was the need for port that would actually get around Chicago for wheat shipments. Basically, what happened in the 1860s was we had businessmen in St. Paul and investors like Jay Cook, that's pictured there, who wanted to build a railroad north from St. Paul to Duluth to be able to have their own shipping port for wheat that was being grown in Minnesota. And eventually, too, the Northern Pacific Railroad was planned to go directly west of Duluth. So as that railroad pushed further west, it was found out that there was really good agricultural capable land for growing wheat in North Dakota. So perfectly positioned Duluth to be developed for the wheat shipments that would eventually be coming through the lake going east to the East Coast where the demand was. This led to our first grain elevator being built in our harbor, Elevator A, as you can see in the picture there. It was built out on the open lake, so not quite in the harbor. The reason again, there was no ship canal yet. So the first focus for the Duluth end of the harbor was having this harbor area out on the open lake. And this is where the railroad terminated. And you can see here some vessels they're there to load cargo as well as grain at the elevator. It was eventually figured out soon after the construction that this was not a great place to have a dock Major reason being out on Lake Superior, docks won't survive very long with how destructive the lake is during the spring and fall and in the winter. And you can see here in this early photo again of elevator A, we have the Duluth Ship Canal that was finished in 1871. One of the reasons that canal was built was so that docks could be developed inside the harbor behind Park Point, to get away from the destructive lake. And if you look on the left here, this was an early breakwater that was built. It was pretty much entirely destroyed by a storm in 1872. So it made loading vessels here at the elevator difficult. And once the canal was built, we had docks that began to be developed, first mainly being grain elevators. This picture kind of shows the development a couple decades later of the many grain elevators that were being built on Rice's Point. Eventually, this would be known as Elevator Row, and we still have a couple of different grain elevators at this location here 150 years later. And with the inbound huge amounts of wheat and grains that coming through our port going east, we also had the development of flour mills. Before Minneapolis kind of became the biggest flour producer in the world in the early 1900s, we actually had one of the busier flour milling operations here in the 1890s, known as the Imperial Flour Milling Company here in Duluth. And it was a natural place to have some of these flour mills with all the grains that we had coming through here. And the mill itself was located on Rice's Point. It's long gone now, but it was a scene of a lot of activity in the 1890s. As time went on, beginning in the 1880s, we had Eastern coal that started to become one of the larger cargoes in our port. Coal early on, when the port was first established in the 1850s to the 1870s, it was looked at as not very common. It was used for ballast in the ships. It wasn't very useful. A lot of the fuel in the area was for usually wood, with how much wood was able to be accessed with the nearby forests. Coal started to become more common, coming outbound with the ships from the lower lakes where it was being mined, gathered from the eastern states. And we started having these huge coal docks being developed throughout the harbor. And eventually there would be pretty much over a dozen by the turn of the century, and became one of the main outbound cargoes for a lot of ships that would come up here. And the coal itself would be distributed to various industries in the area as well as the region, and be used in everyday homes. So there would eventually be a high demand for it. Eastern coal coming inbound would actually start to fall off in the 1940s and 50s as homes started to burn oil, as well as industrial uses start to go down. But we'll get into that in a second. The lumber industry was also very important here early on. After the forests in the nearby immediate area were pretty much logged, the lumber industry focused on gathering white pine up the North Shore from us in northeastern Minnesota, becoming one of the most heavily logged areas in the country at the time. And by the early 1900s, we became one of the biggest centers for log shipments in the entire country, with these logs being taken in either via railroad or rafting to the port, to the various sawmills that we had here. And then the finished cut wood, as you can see in stacks here in this early photo from the Elger Smith lumber mill, would then be loaded onto ships to be shipped to Chicago or Buffalo, further down the system to be used in the lower Midwest or out east. The lumber industry really fell off in the 19 teens and basically was almost non-existent in our port by the 1920s. That was basically when the white pine forests were finally all logged out in our region, and the logging industry moved further west to other resources that they had access to. And then our most important cargo that really made our port the busiest on the Great Lakes was iron ore. And iron ore had been starting to be mined um, further north of us, near Lake Vermilion in the 1880s, which established two harbors as a port. When the Mesabi Iron Range was discovered 40 to 50 miles away from here, that is really when we started having ore docks be built to ship this product down to the steel mills located on the lower lakes. And this is a great example of the amount of activity the iron ore shipments had with the big ore docks in Duluth, the Duluth, Mesabi, and Iron Range Railway. Had the docks on the Duluth side, and the Great Northern Railway ran the ore docks on the Superior side. And you can see on the right with the iron ore, it was a very sticky product, so they actually had to have people stand on top of these ore cars to poke at it to get it to fall out of the car at times. And then the cargo would fall into the dock and then via a gravity chute be loaded onto the ships. And this all began in about 1892 and became pretty much our dominant cargo only a few years after that. And even today, about 60% of our cargo is still iron ore, but it's a different form of it in pellet form. It's not this stuff that we see in the pictures here that's called natural iron ore that's just mined out of the ground without much processing. So some minor industry that happened here was shipbuilding. This was something that became bigger in the late 1800s. Alexander McDougall there on the right actually had our port, used our port to build his whaleback freighters. If you have a lot of interest or have heard of the whalebacks, it's a very unique lake freighter that was built for use on the Great Lakes. And I actually did a program on this subject a year or two ago, might have been a couple years ago. But if you look on our Detroit District's YouTube page, you can find it where I go to super in depth about the history of these things. But they had Alexander McDougall had his first whaleback freighter barge launched here in Duluth in 1888. And soon after, he moved over to the Superior side to establish a big shipyard to be building dozens of these whaleback freighters for use in the bulk trades out of our port. And this area depicted in the picture here is today Fraser Shipyard. So there's been shipbuilding and ship activity in this area for pretty much continuously since these whalebacks were built here in 1890 through 1898. There's about 40 to 50 of these things that were built. After that, we had a different company come into the shipyard called the Superior Shipbuilding Company, and they began building kind of conventional or more well-known classic freighters instead of the whaleback type. And during the World Wars, we had two periods of time when shipbuilding was very big in our port. During World War I, as you can see on the left, we had these smaller, they were called the Frederickstad class of cargo ships that were being built for the Allies in World War I at various shipyards around the harbor. And then World War II, we had our heaviest period of shipbuilding, where there's over 100 vessels of all kinds that were built in our port for the war effort for the Allies, including in this picture here, the building of the 180-foot buoy tenders. I just did a program on this subject back in December. So again, feel free, if you have a lot of interest in World War II shipbuilding, that would be a great program for you to go back and look at for lots of detail as to what was going on here in our port during World War II. And World War II in Korea was basically, again, our peak for cargo. Here in our port, we still haul a lot of cargo today, but during World War II in Korea, we had massive amounts of iron ore. coming through the port. In fact, during World War II alone, a majority, about 2/3 of the iron ore or so used by the United States for war production came through the docks here in Duluth-Superior. So our harbor was very important to the war effort then. And then during the war in Korea, we also had a ton of iron ore coming out of here, not just to support that war, but because of the major economic expansion the United States had right after World War II. And that was, again, a lot of the products flowing in our harbor helped with that economic development. So this is kind of where I'm going to lead off. At this point, I'm going to switch this off to Jayson Hron from the Port Authority. He'll be going through the history of the Port Authority, and there's going to be some overlap with the history that I just mentioned. So I will go ahead here and switch things off with him. I will stop sharing here. Let's see. I'll hand it off to you, Jayson, as soon as you have your presentation up.
Thank you, Scott. One moment while I load the presentation. There we go. Looks like everyone can see it, everything right. Am I coming through with the audio well?
Yep, you sound great, and I can see the presentation really well.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. So building on what Scott talked about, as a port evolves the way the Duluth port has evolved through the years, you can imagine that there might become use for some sort of agency to help manage and promote that growth and port activity. And that is what the Duluth Seaway Port Authority is. I am the communication director for the Duluth Seaway Port Authority. My name is Jayson Hron, and I'm going to take you through the origin story of the Duluth Seaway Port Authority. This will be a narrated type presentation, so I'm going to read directly from the notes from this one, and I'll take it away with the first slide right now. The origin story for the Duluth Seaway Port Authority dates all the way back to the 1890s, and that's really where it all begins, when Duluthians first began calling for a St. Lawrence Seaway connecting the Great Lakes and North America's inland ports to the Atlantic Ocean. This idea gained momentum in the early 1900s, particularly after the International Joint Commission, formed between the United States and Canada, concluded its studies on the topic with a recommendation to build. Despite this recommendation, railways and East Coast ports viewed the Seaway as competition, and they lobbied vehemently and powerfully against it for decades. Maritime commerce within the Great Lakes continued, with Duluth-Superior as the westernmost port and cargo king. But visionaries saw even more potential on the horizon. The allure of the Seaway, and with it, world port opportunities for Duluth-Superior, could not be extinguished. Eventually, the Minnesota legislature took action. An initial step was creation of a Waterways Commission in 1927 to, quote, investigate conditions at the Port of Duluth-Superior and submit to the governor a report recommending the proper policy to be pursued for the best interests of the port. 2 years after the state legislature authorized the Waterways Commission, it passed the Port Authority Act in 1929. This was the true catalyst for the formation of a port authority in Duluth. The act provided for the creation of a port authority plus access to crucial funding streams to cities with more than 50,000 residents and a port moving at least 40 million tons of maritime cargo annually. Not coincidentally, Duluth fit the profile. The act allowed the Duluth City Council to create a port authority and appoint commissioners. Section 8 of the act outlined the mission, quote, it shall be the duty of any such port authority to promote the general welfare of the port district and the port as a whole, to endeavor to increase the volume of the commerce thereof, to promote the efficient, safe, and economical handling of such commerce, and to provide or promote adequate docks, railroad, and terminal facilities for the handling, storage, care, and shipment of freight and passengers to, from, and through the port, unquote. There were several addendums, but one of particular interest was Section 9, which gave the Port Authority, quote, full power and authority to acquire, purchase, construct, lease, or operate any terminal or transportation facility within said district and acquire property for such a facility. All of that led to a Friday lunch meeting of the City Council approved Port Authority of Duluth on January 24th, 1930 at the Spalding Hotel, which you see in this photo. As it was the first official meeting, officers were elected and a $1,280 budget was approved. This allowed the Port Authority to hire a part-time stenographer and draftsman in addition to covering day-to-day operational costs and travel. The first ever meeting of the Port Authority lasted 90 minutes, and we know this thanks to the excellent minutes kept by non-member Secretary A.B. Horwitz. And you can see the roster of the initial group of officials for the Port Authority of Duluth here on this slide. During the meeting, John J. Walter Leiter Jr. was elected president. Our knowledge of Leiter is still evolving, but here's what we know. He was born in Ohio in 1868, so that made him 61 years of age when he began as the Port Authority's first president. He attended Buckle College, which is now known as the University of Akron. He married Grace Trimble in Minneapolis in September of 1899. He came to Duluth in 1902, taking a job as a cashier at Duluth Savings Bank. He eventually worked his way up to a director role at the Northern National Bank of Duluth. He was treasurer of the Episcopal Diocese of Duluth and a local branch of the Red Cross. He was also a member of the prestigious Kichigami Club, which still operates today here in Duluth. One constant from 1930 through today, the Port Authority's leader plays an active, important role. They help shape destiny not just for the Port Authority, but for North America's furthest inland seaport as a whole. Early business for the Port Authority included dredging requests throughout the harbor and exploration of commerce development opportunities. These included advocating for construction of a St. Lawrence Seaway. Mr. Horwitz was sent to Port Arthur, Ontario in May 1931 for an On to the Sea conference, and Mr. Ferris stumped for the Seaway throughout northeastern Minnesota, including at an Eveleth Chamber of Commerce event in 1932, which was covered in the Eveleth newspaper clipping you see here on the screen. Creation of a seaway to the Atlantic Ocean and fulfillment of Duluth-Superior's potential as a true world port was core to the Port Authority's mission from day one. The Port Authority's fifth meeting occurred in August 1933. It was conducted in the Duluth Mayor's reception room. The entire agenda was one item, a proposal from the Merritt, Chapman, and Whitney Company for the construction of an estimated $3.7 million tunnel between Rice's Point on the Duluth side and Connors Point on the Superior side. The idea was that it would replace the much reviled interstate bridge, which they hoped would be removed by the US War Department, quote, because of its obsolescence and its hazard to traffic, unquote. Wisconsin's governor was said to be, quote, wholeheartedly in favor of a tunnel, unquote, and the Port Authority was told, quote, the state is all set for approval of this project in Washington, and that the proper officials in Washington are thoroughly familiar with the tunnel project and have already approved it, unquote. The funding would be mostly federal. It was viewed as a slam dunk public works administration project that would create badly needed jobs in addition to an improved traffic artery between Duluth and Superior. Other voices emerged calling for construction of a high bridge instead of the tunnel. But after much analysis and discussion, the tunnel proposal moved forward for PWA approval. The PWA quickly replied that a bridge might be less expensive and more likely approved. Soon after, in 1934, the PWA denied the tunnel application, setting off a snarl of course reversals and administrative ordeals that would entangle local officials for decades. Not until 1961, almost 30 years after the original application was filed, did the cities of Duluth and Superior finally get a connection, a high bridge we know today as the Blotnick Bridge. Fast forwarding to the 1940s, then Port Authority President F.S. Kaiser wrote to the Duluth City Council on May 9th, 1941, and I quote, "Anyone around the harbor generally would think it was a dumping ground for any old broken down boat that some company wanted to get rid of. Our slips are full of old wrecks and debris of every character, making it an unsightly matter. If the Port Authority is the agency designated by the City Council to do this work, we will make an estimate of the cleanup cost, and after appropriation is made, we will proceed at once to cleaning up the harbor, and also serve notice on the boat lines serving this harbor that they must not use it as a dumping ground for vessels which are no longer to be used," unquote. These were the hot matters of the day in Duluth, but 7 months later, everything changed for the Port Authority and for America. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, Duluthians died and America was drawn fully into World War II. The nation's priorities shifted and the Port Authority of Duluth reflected that. Only one meeting of the Port Authority occurred in 1942, on March 12th. President Kaiser reported that he had accepted a position with the Office of Defense Transportation and that he would resign from the Port Authority effective March 15th. He offered compliments to fellow Commissioner Duncan McPhail, saying, quote, "He has never been too busy, day or night, to give of his time and effort freely for the general good of the city," unquote. McPhail then presented his resignation to President Kaiser. Miss C.H. Lovering, the Port Authority's recording secretary, tendered her resignation next. She was leaving Duluth. With all accounts paid and in good order, but no remaining members of the Port Authority, Commissioner McPhail initiated the final resolution that a copy of these minutes would be transmitted to the Duluth Mayor and City Council. With that, they adjourned the meeting and began the business of winning a war, a business that the Port of Duluth-Superior would support ferociously. The Port Authority's determined 12-year effort to make Duluth a world seaport would have to wait, but building the arsenal of democracy would not. And in many ways, it would flow directly from this port. "12 years later, with World War II and the Korean War finished, Canadian and American attention turned back to the possibility of a St. Lawrence Seaway. Momentum grew, and when the US passed the Wiley-Dondreau Act in 1954, it was clear that the Seaway would finally become a reality. Duluth aimed to be a factor, reactivating its Port Authority on November 18, 1954, in the mayor's reception room. Arthur M. Clure, a prominent Duluthian, naval reservist, and admiralty attorney, was elected president of the reorganized Port Authority. He's the gentleman seated in the middle of this photo you see. In 1955, the Minnesota legislature formalized it and expanded the Port Authority Board, creating the Duluth Seaway Port Authority as an independent public agency with a mission to, quote, "foster regional maritime commerce, promote trade development, facilitate industrial development, and serve as an advocate for port interests in the region and around the world." Clure was a strong advocate for Duluth, its port, and the dream of a St. Lawrence Seaway that would make Duluth a true world port. Sadly, he passed away suddenly on April 3rd, 1956, never seeing the final outcome. But 3 years later, the Seaway became a reality, with Duluth as its western terminus. It was North America's furthest inland seaport. Finally, a true world port and a dream realized. In preparation for the Seaway opening, the Duluth Seaway Port Authority had acquired land on Rice's Point and built a general cargo terminal to facilitate new global trade opportunities. Its name? The Arthur M. Clure Public Marine Terminal. It welcomed an assortment of Duluth's first ocean-going vessels in 1959 and is still welcoming them today. Nearing 100 years since the debut of a port authority in this city, the mission continues today for the Duluth Seaway Port Authority as an economic development entity and an advocate for maritime transportation, freight, and industry. Today's Port of Duluth-Superior generates $1.6 billion in economic activity and supports more than 7,000 jobs. It is the Great Lakes top tonnage port, and the Clure Public Marine Terminal remains right at the heart of the harbor and its shipping activity. We on the Port Authority staff continue building on the dreams and efforts of those who came before us, and we look forward to helping write the next chapter in what's been quite a saga already here at the head of the lakes. With that, I'll turn it back to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Jayson, for your program today, and Scott. Before we get to questions, I am just going to follow up with some updates on our visitor centers and another reminder about our upcoming program in October. Here in Duluth at the Lake Superior Maritime Visitor Center, we are in our spring hours, which means we're open every day except for Wednesday from 10 a.m. until 4:30 p.m. We've got cell phone tours outside and a virtual online tour of the visitor center. And we've got ships running now, so the season has started. So come down and see us. And over in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, the Sulaks Visitor Center will be opening for the season on May 1st, just under a month. And their park is currently open every day from 9 a.m. until 6 p.m. And then one more update. Just another reminder of our upcoming program in October, and we'll be sending out information well in advance of this as a reminder. New Lock at the Soo, we're going to get a project update from someone working directly on the project. They'll be providing an update on what's been happening with the construction of the new lock. So that will be on Thursday, October 3rd at 11:30 a.m. Central or 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And before we get to questions, I just want to share a couple more links with you. We've got our socials up here if you want to follow with what the LSMMA, the Sulaks Visitor Center, or our Detroit District, our Corps of Engineers Detroit District is up to. I think we have an old link here, our vessel schedule. We're not using Duluth boat forecast anymore. We are using harborlookout.com. We've got to fix that. If anyone is interested in joining our mailing list, if you're not already part of it, you'll get information about our upcoming events and upcoming virtual visitor centers. Please send us an email at hellolsmbc@gmail.com. And there's a couple more links for more information. And I already included a link to our YouTube playlist in the chat. We will just go right to questions then. I think I saw one in the chat. When was the Duluth Lift Bridge authorized and then built, and any controversy with Wisconsin? Do you want to take that?
Well, I can tell you that the bridge was built originally between 1901 and 1905, and then it was modified into something a little bit more looking like its current form in 1929. And yes, the creation of a Duluth ship entry has created much controversy in the early days between Duluth and Superior, and there are a entertaining length of lawsuits that ensued in the late 1800s until the federal government finally did declare the port of Duluth-Superior as one unified port in the late 1890s.
Thank you. One more question. How much money from tourism is brought to the Duluth region with people wanting to see the ships move in and out? I don't know if you have a figure for that, Jayson.
I don't think it's possible to quantify the dollar figure from tourists specifically related to ship watching. We do like to say that the ships don't come to watch the tourists come to watch the ships. And we appreciate that we have such a vibrant port here and such a great agency in Visit Duluth that promotes our region for those tourists to come visit.
Question, are there user fees for the Sulaks and the Seaway? Do they cover the operating and maintenance cost? I know there aren't
So at
fees for
least,
the Sulaks. Go ahead.
yeah, yep. I was just gonna say there are no fees for the Sulaks, but I believe the ships do have to pay tolls going through the Canadian locks throughout the Seaway to help cover their operating and maintenance costs. But the Sulaks are totally funded by the U.S. government.
What are the best sources of local information for visitors who come to Duluth for ship viewing? I'm going to plug the visitor center here. We maintain a schedule which we put out on a public website, harborlookout.com, with our best estimates. We receive information from shipping companies, some of the docks, and other resources to put together our best estimates at arrivals and departures. And when our visitor center is open, we are probably really good resources. Us as park rangers are really good resources to let any visitor know what's expected in shipping. Any other advice for best sources of local information for visitors who come to Duluth for ship viewing?
I would definitely echo Sarah's comments. The Visitor Center and the Marine Museum is a fantastic resource for anyone looking for information about shipping in this region, both historic and present. The Port Authority website, duluthport.com, can be a good source as well, and our Port Authority magazine, North Star Port. Those are both fantastic resources. The Harbor Lookout website is excellent, harborlookout.com, for tracking ship schedules. And of course, Visit Duluth is the source for all things visiting Duluth, all the information you need about not only the ships that come and how to see them in the best locations to be able to watch them, but also all of the other tourist concepts here in Duluth and the surrounding environs. That's the source for the best information.
Excellent. Dave asks, are there any employment opportunities at the Port Authority?
Not presently. We have a very small team here at the Port Authority. We're actually a staff of 9. We just recently hired a new director of government and environmental relations to replace the outgoing retired person in that role, but no present job opportunities at the Port Authority. However, if they existed, they would be posted on our website, duluthport.com.
Jayson, what's your background? How did you get into marketing communications and specifically with the maritime industry?
A roundabout way, my origin story, I guess you could say, I began my career after college as a newspaper reporter. So I've always had a love of writing and of research, and I transitioned from being a newspaper reporter to working in public relations, strategic communications, and marketing pretty briefly after that. I was a reporter for about 17 months before I transitioned into the public relations and strategic communication and marketing side of things. Had a number of roles at various companies and entities, but I was born and raised in northeastern Minnesota, and so the allure of being able to be here and be a part of an organization whose mission is to bring business to the Port of Duluth-Superior and economic development to the region, to do good for our region. That allure was what brought me back to this job, and it's just a pleasure every day to be able to use the skills I have to do good things for the Port of Duluth-Superior.
Thank you. Approximately how many ships visit Duluth per year?
Scott, what did we have last year? 775?
Something like that, yep. And with about 50 of those being the salties, not including I don't know how many, do you know how many cruise ships we got last year?
I think we had 11 cruise ship visits last season. I think they're predicting possibly 13 this year. So yeah, we had somewhere between 700 and 800 vessel arrivals each season here in the Port of Duluth-Superior. And like Scott said, the number of salties, the ocean-going vessels, is actually a fairly small percentage of those vessel arrivals. Last year, the number that Scott mentioned, during my time here at the Port Authority, I think I've seen a high of somewhere in the 80s for the number of ocean-going arrivals in a single season. Back in the day, it was a far higher number of ocean-going vessels, but those vessels also carried less freight back in the day. So now they're able to move even more cargo on fewer ships in some instances.
Is there work being done to make Duluth appealing to cruise ships on the lake?
There is work being done. Duluth, just in its present form, is appealing to cruise ships on the region, which is why they're calling here at the port. But there is a tremendous amount of work underway. If you're familiar with the area behind the Duluth Entertainment Convention Center, there is a dock wall there that is being reconstructed largely for the purposes of being able to accommodate cruise ships in an excellent way for generations to come. That work is expected to be completed in 2025. So we are excited to see the continuance of cruising here in our harbor. It harkens back to a tradition of cruising in this area that began really in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and then went away for a while as automobiles became more popular. But now there's a renaissance of sorts for cruising, and Duluth-Superior is certainly excited to be a part of that and building out new features to be able to make that even more appealing for those cruise lines.
To just follow that up, one of our local live cameras, the Great Lake Aquarium Cam from Duluth Harbor Cam, has footage of that or coverage of that project, and I'm including that link in the chat here if you're interested in following along with that project. Jayson, can you give us a forecast for this shipping season? Is there any new cargoes or any new vessels that haven't been here before that you're thinking might be coming this year?
Looking ahead to this season, we are pleased to see the strong demand for domestic steel, which of course is good for iron ore, and anything that is good for iron ore is good for the Port of Duluth-Superior, as it is our king cargo. So we're looking for that to continue. We had a strong grain shipping rally in Q4 of 2023. We're hoping to build on that in 2024. Of course, our first ocean-going arrival of the season arrived earlier this week, and it is loading wheat bound for Algeria. So exciting way to start the season, and we hope to see those grain totals go back up to more of the historical averages after having a couple down years of grain here. We're excited this year for the continuation of our transatlantic monthly liner service, which launched last year for the first time since the late 1970s. We have a regular monthly transatlantic liner service coming here to our port between Duluth and Antwerp. We're looking for that to expand in 2024 and move even more materials and machinery for both import and export. One not new cargo coming in this year, but cargo we haven't seen a lot of in the last year and a half to 2 years is wind energy cargo. We're expecting a fairly robust season for wind energy cargo arrivals here in the Port of Duluth-Superior. So looking forward to that. And as those pieces get larger and larger, it's amazing to see how the ships, the trucks, and the trains all manage to carry those precious cargoes to their final destination.
Awesome, thank you. Couple more questions came in. Are all Duluth area major bridges protected with sufficient fenders and other structures to prevent a ship strike damaging a bridge?
MnDOT and WSDOT work together with the Port Authority to make sure that maritime shipping considerations always factor in to the architectural and planning processes with those bridges and those infrastructure pieces that cross the waterway. So it is always top of mind for all of those agencies to build them and fortify them in ways to make them as safe as possible and as resilient as possible.
Are certain docks only used by certain companies?
Yes, the Kluwer Public Marine Terminal that I talked about in my presentation is the only public general cargo terminal in the harbor. Every other terminal in the harbor is a private terminal, so they are all owned by private companies and used for private purposes.
And it's probably a Scott question. Can you talk about the bridge in the photo?
Well, I just wanted to add one more thing here on the Port Authority has a great map on their website showing the whole harbor and all the different companies that are involved in shipping. So if anyone has any interest in the chat, I would definitely recommend visiting their website to see that map. It's pretty cool. And the ownership companies of those docks kind of change sometimes year to year, but a lot of the major ones are the same. This is the bridge actually that Jayson mentioned in the history of the Port Authority. That is the old interstate bridge that was built in 1897. Does that sound right, Jayson?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. And this was for one of the main connections between Duluth and Superior for decades. And the problem with it was, at least to my understanding, it was mostly a railroad bridge. It did have the ability for people and trolleys to go across it, but other than that, it was kind of a bottleneck. So the Blotnick, when that was built in the 60s, that became a huge improvement over this smaller, older railroad bridge that was eventually mostly dismantled. Part of it is still existent today. The very end of the bridge that's on the left-hand side of the image is still there, used as a fishing pier and used by me to take pictures of ships going by. So it's a pretty cool place to visit if you haven't ever been to it in Duluth. Yeah.
Yeah, that would definitely qualify as one of the sneaky insider locations for ship watching and just enjoying our harbor from a different perspective that not everyone knows about. The end of that interstate bridge and the fishing pier. It's a spot that is off the beaten path, but provides a very good perspective.
Mm-hmm.
That's all the questions that we've had so far. We can stay on for another minute or two, see if we get any more. But I just wanted to thank everyone for attending today. And thank you to Scott and Jayson for your presentations. That was very interesting. And just a reminder again about October 3rd will be an update on the Sulaks project. So if anyone has any last minute questions, throw them in the chat.
Thanks everyone for the kind words.
Jayson, do you remember a fee for going across that bridge?
Yeah, I saw that comment come in, and I've I've heard that there was a toll and a fee associated with it. In my research regarding the origins of the Port Authority and the discussion of that tunnel creation to eliminate the bridge, there was discussion of being able to eliminate the interstate bridge and use that toll money on the tunnel instead to help offset the costs of creating the tunnel. So I think it's certain that there was a toll on that interstate bridge, yes.
Okay, well, I think we will wrap this up. Thanks again, Jayson and Scott, for the presentation today, and hopefully we will see you in October. Have a great spring, summer, fall, and we'll see you in a few months. Thanks, everyone.